Hello and welcome to another Turnstile Tours virtual program. I'm Stephen DW, coming to you from Flushing, Queens. And today we are going to take a trip to Prospect Park, to Grand Army Plaza on the edge of Prospect Park, to look at the history of the Grand Army Plaza Arch and the Puppet Free Library that was inside the arch for a few years a little while back. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about some upcoming programs and also let you know how you can support the programs we do here at Turnstile Tours. We've been doing these. We're on the 200 mark for the number of programs we've done, and we're going to keep on doing them. So mask up, get your vaccine when it becomes available for you, and we'll all make a new world soon. Looks like we got some people from Vermont and people with puppet associations out there. Today we're going to, our tour will be we'll be joined by Theresa Linnihan and Sara Peattie. If you know anything about puppetry, particularly on the East Coast, particularly Sara Peattie is a huge name in Boston, and Theresa as well, who is joining us from Minnesota. And we also have today Andrew Gustafson, my colleague, who is at the Arch. We'll go to him momentarily. And Cindy Vandenbosch is backstage. I want to give some context. Some of you are maybe not so familiar with this arch and Prospect Park, and it's kind of a key idea here, a key to the story is about the location of this, this library. It's really in the cultural center of Brooklyn. So here we're looking at a map from Prospect Park Alliance with Red Hook, where I normally talk about waterfront things, and Greenwood, which we've looked at in previous programs, and the Gowanus Canal with the highway pointing to the Battery on Manhattan, and Flatbush Avenue pointing more toward Midtown. And here, right at the top of the park, is the Arch and Grand Army Plaza. But also notable that on this spot we have, just next to it is the Brooklyn Public Library. We have the Brooklyn Museum right over here. And down in this neck of the woods was Ebbets Field. And of course the Brooklyn Botanic Garden is in here. So we have a real cultural center for Brooklyn right in this stretch, very close to downtown. Going back to the construction of the arch in around 1890. So this is a photo from Prospect Park Alliance looking at its construction, and then also when it was brand new. And a big part of the reason we're having this conversation today is because the arch is about to be restored. There's the need for renovation, and we'll talk a little bit about why, some of the reasons that it needs to a restoration, and a lot of that's to do with this massive statue on the top. So we'll get all into that in just a moment. But let's go now to Andrew, who is out at Grand Army Plaza, and with Salty, Andrew and Cindy's dog. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Stefan, how are you?
Doing well. Really good to see you. How cold is it out there?
You know, it's around 30. It's okay. It's a little harder though when I have to manipulate the phone without my gloves. But yeah, so I'm here at Grand Army Plaza, and you can see right over my shoulder there is the library. You know, it's something that we talk about a lot in our Prospect Park tours, about how all of these, you know, civic institutions were born out of the park because they were built on property that was meant for the park, but they didn't actually end up using, because the original plan for the park had Flatbush Avenue running through the middle of it. And so they purchased land on the north side of Flatbush Avenue, intending that to be part of the park. But after the Civil War, and when a new design by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted was created, they moved it all south of the park, but kept the land. And so that's why we have the library, the Botanic Garden, and the Brooklyn Museum all on that site, into this cultural center that we have here today. But, you know, the other thing that I should talk about, you know, Grand Army Plaza, when this area was conceived and when the park was built in the late 1860s, this is really the edge of the city. Today we think about it as this sort of roundabout that's right smack in the middle of Brooklyn, but it was really, you know, on the frontier, and it was conceived of originally as a much more, just like the rest of the park, much more subtle entrance. So the Grand Army Plaza arch was part of a reimagining of the entrance, particularly when the firm of McKim, Mead, and White came on board in the late 1880s, very much in the City Beautiful movement. And so if you look behind me here, you can see those monumental columns that now frame the entrance. And I'll flip my camera around so you can see those a little bit better. So these new entrances with, large columns, statues, a wall all the way around the park, this was all conceived in the late 1880s, early 1890s. And the construction of this triumphal arch celebrating the Civil War was part of that. So let's take a look at the arch right here. So this is it. It was, as Stefan was saying, they were constructing it in those photos around 1890. It was dedicated in 1892, and it's the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Arch. And you can see on the very front of it, the soldiers on the left. These statues are the U.S. Army, and then on the right, we have the U.S. Navy. Now, an interesting thing about these statues, and of course at the top we have the Statue of Columbia and the Chariot, but these three sets of statues done by Frederick William McMonnies were actually all added later. They were added after 1893. So the original design was a much simpler sort of triumphal arch that just really had the stonework and the bas-relief sculptures on it. So yeah, so it took a few years for it to take the shape that we know of it today. What's interesting as well is that all of these features, kind of face the park instead of, facing the city. So as some people say, it's meant to face the south, just in case they have any ideas about seceding again. But yeah, so there's lots of little wonderful details to this structure. We won't go into all of them today, but yeah, as you mentioned, in the coming weeks, we don't have a date set yet. Maybe when it gets a little bit warmer, we're going to do a program where we'll go inside and talk about the restoration project, because the Prospect Park Alliance has received close to $9 million to do a comprehensive restoration of the structure, which really hasn't been done before. It's been restored a number of times, but this will be really comprehensive and put a completely new roof on it. And what's so interesting about it too is that, we think about it as sort of like a column or a statue or something, is just sort of this like solid piece, but it's a building. And we'll see later in the program the amazing stuff that was happening inside the rooms inside this structure.
I was thinking the exact same thing, and it's really, looking at it, it's so massive. It's hard to imagine that it's hollow. But can we get a closer look and see the evidence of the inside?
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to go up here. We have these medallions all around it that represent different Brooklyn units from the Civil War. And then we have these two bas-relief sculptures. This one right here of Abraham Lincoln riding a horse. And this is the doorway, the entrance into one side of the column. And then on the other side, we have Ulysses S. Grant and a door into the other side. And Sara and Theresa will tell us more about where those doors led to.
Yeah, this is great. Howie's sharing a story in the chat about memories of the arch. And we've got a bunch of photos of the inside of the arch. So, and thank you for taking the view directly above you there. And how about, before we let you go, can we see a little glimpse of Salty for the Salty fan club folks out there?
Yeah, she's excited because this is a very long walkie. She gets to come up to the arch. We live a couple miles away. So, Salty, hey. Sit. Good girl.
Oh, so, very impressive.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you,
she
Andrew.
loves the park.
Thanks. We'll let you get warm. Appreciate your sharing that with us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm so excited for the guests we have today. And like I said, stay tuned. We'll be announcing soon, hopefully, when we're going to do a program about the arch. And join us on the 29th when we'll take a closer look at another arch restoration project in the park at the Endale Arch. But yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just go inside the arch before we bring our guests on. Just a moment here. We'll actually take you inside and go up the stairs there. So if you go through that door he showed you, this is what you'd see. Right now, presumably as bare as we see it here, with the stairs going up. And we'll get Theresa and Sara to tell us more about what we're looking at in just a moment. And then this, I believe they refer to as the transom, with the room across the top. And Theresa sketched out the how that was used by the puppet library. But let's bring Theresa and Sara on at this time so they can tell us what we are looking at here, and we'll take a deeper view. Hello, welcome, Theresa.
Hello, Stefan and everyone. Hey, Sara.
Hello.
So let's, before we get into the arch, I'd like to share with our audience a little bit about the two of you. Who are you and how did you, each of you, become involved with the Puppet Library?
Shall I go first, Sara, or you?
Theresa.
Please, Theresa, yes.
Okay. Well, it links back, our affiliation with the Arch actually links back to the Puppeteers Cooperative, which was and is a puppet company founded by Sara Peattie and George Konoff, and expanded into New York City around 1996 and began performing at Lincoln Center Out of Doors and also at Prospect Park in Brooklyn.
And where had it been based before New York City?
Well, in Boston, and also George and Sara did a number of years of touring the country back in the day when downtowns around the nation seemed to be wilting and dying. Chamber of Commerce in a number of cities around the country called on different artists to renovate or help inspire people to renew their downtown area. And so George and Sara did a lot of traveling around the country for puppet workshops that pulled in the community and built puppets and made parades and pageants for the downtown areas in the country. Am I getting this right, Sara?
Yeah, that's
good. Okay. So in the meantime, we did take this expansion journey from Boston to the Emerald City, to New York, and began performing with Lincoln Center Out of Doors, but also in Prospect Park doing a Rite of Spring every year. And that was an alliance with Prospect Park, where we began to develop a relationship with the park, helping them
basically just the Lincoln Center Out of Doors pageants for financing a bunch of free shows since we were running around with puppets anyhow.
Right. But these big puppets, I mean, when you do an outdoor pageant, you tend to create large scale puppets or a lot of them. Those are the two ingredients, either a lot of puppets or some very big puppets. And then the question becomes where to put them. Where do you store them? And so we were sharing, storefronts and, friends that would help, or Sara would lug them all back to her puppet library in Boston, beautiful puppet library in Boston. But because we had this lovely growing relationship with Prospect Park, one snowy day when I stopped in at the Audubon Center, one of our allies there asked me about what they called a white elephant, referring to the arch, an empty space that had briefly been a gallery and had some care and painting, invested in it, but was now empty. And under the care of the park, and they wondered if we might have some ideas for it. So of course, that's where Sara comes in, because Sara's first and brilliant idea was it needs to be a library. It has to be a library. And because we had been accumulating all these puppets from our outdoor performances, we were able to fill 4 stories of 1 pillar with puppets that could be loaned out to any number of events in all 5 boroughs.
Now, Sara, there's so many references in Theresa's story to you and to your background. So how did you come to form the cooperative and start these libraries to begin with?
George and I had started the Puppeteers Cooperative in San Francisco way back when, and we're traveling around, as Theresa said. I ended up at Emmanuel Church in Boston, storing puppets there with another group, actually, the Back Alley Puppet Theater, which was more based in Boston and not traveling. It's the same kind of puppets, but a different group of people, more respectable and solid citizens. And so we had these puppets in Boston, and people started lending them to people who needed them, and then people couldn't find them, and we started writing it down, and it gradually became a library without anybody noticing it. But then it was an official library, and it was a thing, and it's very nice. There's a few of them. There's one in Pittsburgh, a puppet library.
Where in Pittsburgh is the library?
It's an actual library.
Oh, wow.
Puppets.
As Cindy has mentioned in the chat here, I knew your library in Boston a little bit, and I actually dug up here a hand puppet head that I made. So it's like the first puppet head I made in a class with Dr. John Bell when he was teaching at
yes.
So yeah, that's how I got introduced to all this world here.
Yeah, John Bell, the puppet professor, knows all these gathers all these people together.
Yeah, and he's so yeah, I gather he's no longer at Emerson, but he's at the Ballard Institute in Connecticut. Yes. So doing great work there, and of course still associated with Great Small Works. You were talking about large size puppets or a lot of little puppets, and Great Small Works, as the name suggests, does the large size puppets. But aren't they also behind the International Toy Theater Festival that's been at St. Anne's in the past?
Yes, and also the Honk Festival, which is international.
Yeah, so really great community events, bringing people together. I love, Theresa, this genesis out of a low point for urban areas, and the idea that puppets bring life to a city. And here we are at, so you're looking at this arch, and you have a vision for a puppet library in the center of Brooklyn. And this is in 2004, is that right?
2004, 2005, yeah.
So a little while ago. Well, let's take a quick look inside to see what it was that you made there. So again, here's the our schematic, and here we are going up the steps, and I'll let you two tell us what we're looking at here.
Well, in both pillars, there is a set of spiral stairs, beautiful spiral staircases in each pillar. And they have, I believe, if I recall correctly, there are 4 levels along that stairwell. And on those levels, we would stage themes of puppets, Halloween themes, or ghost, or goblin, or dragon, or skeleton area, a bird area, a giant puppet backpack area. These heads here could be called fat heads and could be worn just, on a body, just put it on your body, or they could be attached to a backpack puppet, which makes you 10, 12 feet tall. So we used
That,
the
which
stairs.
sort of harkens back to Greek theater and the massive size that they put into the ancient Greek theater with actors standing on huge platform stilts and things. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, people would come in that little door.
And you said this is in one column. So is this the Lincoln door or the Grant door?
This is the Lincoln door.
Okay.
The Lincoln door. And people would enter through this little door. And as you mentioned, you know, so many people assumed that the arch was solid. So when they'd see this little door open and a puppet or two propped outside, their first astonishment was, it's hollow, you can go inside. And then their second surprise was that it's a library. You mean I can borrow these puppets and I can borrow them for free? And the answer being yes, this is here for you to serve your parades, block parties, demonstrations, protests.
Oh, and we have greetings to you from one of your friends. The Old Stone House says hello.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, Kim. And so, you know, on each platform or each level in the arch had sort of a theme to it. When you first walked in, you'd be greeted by one of Sara's beautiful creations, a giant puppet of the city. This was a woman, probably 20 feet tall, draped in a handmade quilted dress that was also stenciled with people and cars and traffic all running around her skirts. And she would stand at the entrance with her arms open in greeting, looking down at you to say hello. And around her would be a number of backpack puppets, bride and groom for weddings, you know, and celebrations of that sort. And here's
there we have the bride and groom. Yeah,
there you go, bride and groom, banners of all sorts that Sara beautiful stencils that she made of any number of banners that we hung in the library that could make an event, you know, make a staging area for celebrations for people if they want to borrow and create an area of focus. We had all kinds of, so there were a number of backpack puppets on the ground floor. And then as you wander up the spiral staircase, you'd explore other, you know, moods or, you know, animals, people, say different sections that focused, you know, on either creatures or characters, cats and dogs and dragons.
Oh, no, we have the skeleton that you referred to, or one of them, a whole collection of them, it looks like.
Yes, you know, a couple of giant backpack skeletons and then banner skeletons.
And we have a question from Howie. How do you get to the door from the ground? Was there a way to cross the circle of traffic around the arch?
Well, you know, the interesting thing about the arch is that it really is a pedestrian place. There is a traffic circle, and of course there's all kinds of traffic speeding around it, but there are crosswalks built, you know, sort of in spokes out from the center, from Grand Army Plaza and the arch. There are traffic crosswalks to the library, to the park, to, you know, so that, you know, people could find their way across without having to risk traffic. But, you know, as far as cars, we were able to sometimes pull vehicles in under the arch because there was a driveway, two driveways actually around the arch, where people could pull in vehicles to be able to borrow a number of puppets. If they were doing a parade or staging an event, they could pull right up to the arch and load up that way. And it was also handy for us when we were delivering puppets or when we were creating the theater in the transom.
Well, look, take some look at some of the images from the transom in just a moment. Michelle says, one of the coolest underground magical moments I've seen in New York or anywhere. What Theresa and Sara did with the arch and projects there were amazing. So a lot of love out there for this project. I did want to take, we have this curious entrance to this hidden magical aspect to the library, and I wanted to note that that's sort of, as in my experience, consistent with the libraries. This is the entrance to the Puppet Library in Boston. And this is, for those of you who know Boston, this is right in the center of Boston. Back here at the end of the alley, that greenery is the Boston Public Garden. So you're just a block away from the Boston Common, and make way for ducklings and the swan boats and the old the exterior for the Cheers bar, and on this side it's Newbury Street, and on that side is Commonwealth Avenue, just absolutely in the center of Boston and underneath a church. And this door is, Sarah, is that even 4 feet high, that door?
It's, I think, exactly 4 feet high.
So just a really magical little discovery if you don't know it's there. I used to take people there late at night away from bar. Let me show you this magical, incredible thing in Boston. And here's the evidence of a puppet library, although even more magical once you get inside. So here we have an image of one of your shows. This was a huge event. Theresa, what can you tell us about what we're seeing here?
Well, a real collaborator with us in creating a theater in the transom at the top of the arch was the Czechoslovak American Marionette Theater, and its artistic director, Vít Hošeš, seen here with a broom in the opening intro to a performance called The Bass Saxophone, taken from a Czech novel by Josef Skvorecky. Vít, forgive me if I mispronounced the name, but a wonderful, wonderful story about the German occupation in Czechoslovakia, and a band of literally the walking wounded soldiers and people who have been wounded and but are musicians, and they love jazz. And so does the young protagonist in the story, loves jazz. And so they somehow, in coming together, they have to get through all their differences, all the propaganda, all of the madness that surrounds them. And the music pulls them together. The bass saxophone and the band pull them together to find their humanity. Beautiful, beautiful show. We started at the base of the arch with a little, a jazz piano with John Hyde and someone on the bass saxophone, and did some dancing and set up the notion of having to hide jazz because it was forbidden by the Nazi regime. And so, just to set up that tension as the audience gathered, that they were part of a secret, and then to lead them into that enchanting spiral staircase, each level being another kind of atmosphere of the times. So you were traveling back through time as you walked up the spiral stairs into the transom, which would seat about 60, 65 people. And there would be a little stage, and where we'd tell this story, a very intimate space, which was wonderful for staging the work of emerging puppeteers. That was our focus, to try to give a place, a presence, a stage that would be very attractive to the press, which the press loved the puppet library, and very attractive to people who, wanted to get into one of those secret spaces in New York City. Absolutely. And find a show, because you could wander through the puppet library and maybe you would be inclined to borrow a puppet, but to find that there was a show that afternoon, a puppet show, maybe a miniature Cranky show, or maybe we had a magician who used it, just object theater, to tell a little.
You've touched on a lot of topics and terms we need to unpack for people. And we also have a lot of great questions coming in here, but I know we'll get into Crankies and all these things in a little bit. Can you again say for us again the name of the book that from which the bass saxophone was derived?
It is a short story actually called The Bass Saxophone by a very wonderful Czech author, Josef Skvorecky. I hope I'm saying it correctly.
We'll track down the precise spelling and get that out to our subscribers after the program.
Yeah, and adapted, I should say, by Vít Hošeš, the director of the Czech American Marionette Theater. He adapted it for the stage, for the puppet performance.
Other really basic questions we should cover here. So when did the Puppet Library open in the Arch?
I keep thinking it's 2004. It was, we were there for about 5 years. And it was a seasonal thing because there's no heat in the arch and no bathrooms and no elevator. So while we were very fortunate to get funding from the Brooklyn Arts Council and from other grants that helped to support and build, an environment that was safe for the public, that where the stairs were lit and where, and to set up a campaign that would let the public know that we had this resource for people. We had to open it in the spring, usually around April. The Rite of Spring that we did in May at Prospect Park was sort of an official taking a puppet pageant into the park that was, start sometimes at the arch or slightly in, at the entrance to the park. And that would be a kind of official announcement that the puppet library is open for the season. And we'd run it through Halloween. It would be open through Halloween because of, Halloween and being such an invitation for imagery.
Absolutely, yeah.
Puppets that want to be borrowed. And sometimes we would go back in, I would go back in and meet somebody by appointment outside of that season, that was warm enough for being in the arch, to loan puppets to organizations or events that needed them outside of that spring through autumn period.
I definitely want to talk more about who is borrowing puppets from the library, but we have one other question I didn't want to miss, and that was Sara. I'm not quite sure I have the name of the church right, so I'd like to hear from you. Which church is it that where your library is based in Boston?
It's Emmanuel Church in Boston, 15 Newbury Street.
Thanks. So for those of you who know and love Boston, it's another site for you to look up. And in a basement there, you're able to operate all year round?
Yes, it's well heated. And it has, a place where I can do little shows in the front of the church in the doorways. And they also have a great music program. So and many helpful, homeless programs and so on. So they're a hub of activity.
That's great. And I would love to get into details about who is borrowing puppets. And I'd be curious to know if it's the same sorts of people for both for when it was in the Arch and also for the Boston Library, or do you get slightly different crowds? So who is borrowing your puppets? Let's start with Sara. Who borrows your puppets today in Boston?
It's pretty random. Schools, there's always somebody doing the Lion King and they need all the animals, or pageants, benefits, people borrow them for demonstrations, people come and get stuff. XR does building workshops there where we have building space. People borrow puppets and just take them for a walk in the park pretty often.
That's fantastic.
I was starting to do little ad hoc parades. And the park is used to that sudden puppets by now.
Is that fairly similar to what you experienced, Theresa, with the Arch?
Yes, it really is all over the map. Many schools, doing fundraisers or special programs or performances would turn to the puppet library for puppets. Parades, different organizations that, in all the boroughs, we're staging a parade for St. Patrick's Day or for the Halloween in Park Slope. There, the Park Slope parents held an annual Halloween parade. So it would be schools, protests against, changes happening in the city that were disruptive to communities. People would come in and look for imagery to help focus their message, which, this very powerful when a giant skeleton comes around the corner. So, there filmmakers from NYU, young filmmakers looking for, interesting imagery and something that would really, light up the story they're trying to tell with film. just people that, wanting to have a party to celebrate, have a birthday party, have a block party, have a fundraiser. So it really, really is across the map.
Did you ever have people who just discovered, stumbled upon you that left with a puppet?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we actually made, Sara and I actually made a little children's book at the suggestion of someone who had come all the way from California to visit a relative and showed up at the puppet library and couldn't wait to get there, wondering what a puppet library was. And she said this would make a wonderful children's book. So we tried putting one together. And naming some of the regulars or some of the stories that happened out of the puppet library, children that would fall in love with a puppet and learn it for the first time, discover a small marionette and discover it for the first time and learn to give it a voice. And right there in front of you, watching that magic for the first time is pretty amazing.
That brings up a really interesting point, if I may. You said learn it for the first time. And as you said that, you're moving your hands, which reminds me that borrowing a puppet is different in important ways from borrowing a book. So people are going across the plaza to the library and they either know how to read or they're learning to read, but they can access the material that they're borrowing in a way that's really useful for them. What is it like to borrow a puppet and learn it, and what do people do with them? How does that happen?
It actually happens rather quickly initially. When you become a puppeteer, you come to a realization that it's a lifetime of work to really make that profound magic of inhabiting an inanimate object, of making it, giving it a spirit. It's an extension, a stretching of your spirit into an inanimate object to bring it to life and to give it a story. So, but initially, people are a little shy of getting into a puppet and how do I do this? What do I do? And really what we used to do was take a little drum or flute and make a little music, because music and puppetry are such a natural partners. So as soon as people would hear just a little bit of music, they begin to just do a tempo. And that resonates all the way up through a giant puppet. And so that it suddenly is moving, is dancing, is relating.
And to speak of dancing brings up, of course, Peter Schumann, from whom so much of this derives, who started Bread and Puppet Theater in New York, up in East Harlem, if I'm not mistaken, then ended up in Judson Church at some point. Mm-hmm. And as I recall the founding story, and correct me or elaborate if I'm wrong here, but he was making sculptures, and the sculptures needed to go into the street. And so he started making them out of papier mache so they were easier to move. And he looks at puppets as dancing sculptures, which I find a beautiful way of, it really expands my notion of what a puppet can be and what a sculpture can be.
Yeah, the puppets are beautiful hanging on a wall, but there's so much more. The fact that they're inhabited by the human spirit, by a story, by a character, so they're a combination of a visual art form and theater as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's a kind of,
Susan here has a great experience with Sara's library. She says that the after school where she works has been allowed to try on puppets and make a parade in the Boston Garden. And so she shares her gratitude for your work up there in Boston, getting young people to dance with puppets in the park. So we have people stumbling upon the puppets. We have people planning parades or films or other works. Were you building puppets for the library? Or you mentioned that a lot of these puppets came from other shows. Were there any sort of library purpose-built puppets as well?
Not so much. I mean, for myself, because people want to borrow characters like Pinocchio, which we don't have. We have what we have in the library in Boston is like sets of puppets, like a sun parade, a river parade, a group of dragons, a group of birds, so that they're more like ecological niches. We don't do particular characters of the day because puppets last much longer than that.
Right. But has anyone cast an unexpected puppet in a role like a Pinocchio that you know of?
Oh yeah. I mean, we have a dog and cat that played Romeo and Juliet at Lincoln Center, and all of those. Yeah, and when people do the Lion King, they'll pick some random puppet to be a warthog, and that's like, if you pointed it and say warthog, people will go along.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a look at some of the other puppets that we talked about. We've got some few photos here from more of the bass saxophone, particularly, and also to get into an idea we're talking about. We talked about huge puppets, and we've made some reference to small puppets. These puppets are sort of bigger than I normally think of as a puppet. They seem to be about human size, getting a little Theodore Skipetaris going on here. I love this one. That's a sort of a musical instrument that's become a person. And even there's a sort of sense of puppet with this person's mask going on. What do you see that we're looking at?
Well, I made those puppets for the bass saxophone. Yeah, those are my characters, the puppet characters, and with sort of Vít and the Czech American Marionette Theater was very fond of exposing the puppeteer, so that we'd often costume the puppeteer as the character, and then you'd have a double reality of the inner world, the inner thinking of a character, as well as its outer manifestation. And those roles would shift between the human character, the actor playing, or the puppeteer, and the puppet itself. Sometimes the puppet would have the voice, and sometimes the voice would be that voice within that character. So it was a fascinating way to look at a story. And each one of the puppets here are actually an instrument. There's the one you can't see behind the bass saxophone is a piano, a woman who's a character who's also a piano.
Is that this one here?
And yeah. And then the one in the red dress was the singer in the band. And there's you can't see it here, but there was a trumpet player who's also in the band, and an accordion player. So
and just to clarify for our audience, this space we're looking at, we can see some bits of wall in the background. This is up in the transom, in the cross section, across the top of the arch, right?
Right. We actually, brought in theater lights, and there was room, probably about, 14 feet by 12 feet stage space, small, but because there were two entrances to the transom on either end, you could have an audience entrance, but you could also have a backstage area that led into the puppet library. And this particular set was just a bed.
I think we have more photos of that here. Yes, this is a little better. And this, not only do we see the bed and a character that we've seen before, we also have these fantastic tiny puppets there. They look like what I think of as traditional Czech marionettes, but on a very small scale.
Yes, these are, Vít has a large collection of wonderful puppets, some of them hundreds of years old. And these puppets come from a family that's been in the business of creating these puppets for for several generations. And so some of the molds for these puppets actually go back to the 1920s. They're beautifully.
You say molds, are they made of clay or?
I think it's a kind of composite. You'd want to call it maybe a sawdust plaster composite.
Oh wow! Okay.
I'm thinking of it rightly, and they're beautifully hand painted, hand costumed, and actually incredibly effective in their movement. Able to convey a lot of emotion in their movement. They can kneel, sit, stand, dance. So we often use them in combination with a larger puppet to get at other perspectives of a story.
In this case, a much larger puppet. We have an absolutely enormous hand, and some of these tiny puppets, and people who seem to be, are they is everyone here strictly a puppeteer, or are there people who are strictly actors in this show?
You know, whenever there would be an audition, when Veet would hold an audition for a show like this, he would, actors would come in and they would recite, their audition piece. And then Veet would hand them a puppet and say, do your audition piece again, but make the puppet do your audition. And the acting would be superb, just wonderful acting, because suddenly all that self-conscious nervousness that the actor might be feeling in an audition, all of that energy is channeled into the puppet, and the concentration on making that puppet say those lines, and it would make the actor so much more believable, more real. I watched it over and over again in auditions. The people you see here, Debbie Bishaw, Ronnie Wasserstrom, these are very excellent puppeteers and company members of the Czech American Marionette Theater. And then there's myself wielding the big hand. And then, I forget his name. He was new to the company, just joined it. He played the protagonist, Danny, in the story, the young man who's going through this adventure and learning to peel away prejudice.
And this is the gentleman in the hat in the photo?
No, that's Ronnie Wasserstrom.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he's a wonderful puppeteer. Very
so the glasses, mustache, and nose is the gentleman you're referring to.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so all kinds of puppets. And to step away from the arch for just a moment and look at you've mentioned these huge backpack puppets. So this is from Sara's website for the Puppeteers Cooperative. And there are, on that website, there are lots of recipes for making puppets of all kinds of sizes. And here we have some details about how you make a giant backpack puppet. And this is the cranky that we referred to earlier. So tell us about what we're seeing here. Theresa, Sara, we haven't spoken about, and this is your website. So can you explain to us what a cranky is?
Oh, well, it's a paper movie. They used to use them in vaudeville, I believe, before movies came along for backdrops traveling. You have two upright sticks and then a strip of paper or cloth, which cranks between them. As you turn one stick, the paper travels so that you can have a whole moving landscape or a whole set of events just moving along while you tell or sing a story. You can have a fancy, nice wooden plywood box like is illustrated here, or you can get a box, just a regular box and put a cranky into it. Teachers invent this by themselves, teachers tend to invent it independently, where you have a crayon box and a couple of pencils and a piece of that cashier's paper, a strip of that cashier's paper for kids to draw a story on.
It's great stuff. There's some brilliant puppeteers. Is it a woman whose last name I think is Fahey down in Baltimore, who does really extraordinary work with shadow puppets and crankies? Lots out there to explore. And we referred to Peter Schumann earlier. This is a couple of photos from when I was up at Bread and Puppet in, I think this is 2007. So that's Peter and with one of these huge over life-size puppets and some of the puppet collection. Now, an important distinction, I've read articles that occasionally refer to the puppet library as a puppet museum, and it's really a museum that they have up there in Glover, Vermont, where Peter Schumann and Bread and Puppet is. So did you have people who viewed the library in the Arch more as a museum and didn't really see that as having that accessibility, or did everyone really get that this was accessible and something they could actually take home? And incidentally, how long were people allowed to take puppets away?
Well, people normally we kept to the rules of most libraries. We said you can borrow this for 2 weeks, or less. because you may want to set up a parade or have a party, and then where do you say you borrow a dozen puppets for it, and then where do you put them? So a lot of times people would just say, well, no, we're going to bring them back right away. But a lot of people went through the puppet library just for the experience of being in a very enchanted place, a haunted, enchanted place, and didn't feel the need to borrow puppets. And other people came precisely because they had heard they could have access to this very potent imagery to help whatever they were trying to create in their neighborhood or as a project. So both, we had both, and we had people who had never seen puppet shows. We always said for our performances that it was a matter of donation. We had a suggested donation for performances, but if you showed up and your kids had never seen a play or never seen a puppet show, and you couldn't afford to pay that suggested $10, then the whole idea was an altruistic one, like a library, to give you access, to give people empowerment, for their ideas, but also for their minds, for their, to introduce them to a very ancient and an ancient tradition of animating inanimate objects and telling and storytelling.
And John Bell often talks about reanimating dead material, that we're using paper and leather and all these other materials and bringing it back to life.
Yes.
Yes, and the library was going to be, the idea is for it to be an entrance where people learn to deal with puppets or crankies, and then eventually they go home and make their own and do their own parade. So it was like, yeah, and now you write your own book, obviously.
Right. And often, yes, it was all set up in an altruistic kind of fashion of, giving to people, but more often than not, people came back to say, well, can you come and can we hire you to do a show? Can you come and bring a bunch of puppets and do a puppet try on? And it would turn into work for us. It would circle back, so that whole act of, enabling and empowering people would circle back to help us again. It was quite beautiful the way it worked.
That's a great argument on behalf of an attempted altruism. That's fantastic. It has a real ROI to it. So what can you tell us about the puppet library? Well, two things. One, why did the puppet library leave the arch? It sounds like it was tremendously successful. And also, what is happening with that puppet library today?
Well, every year the roof would leak. That massive statue of horses and Columbia, all with her, beautiful. And the view from up there is astonishing, of Brooklyn and the East River. But the weight of that statue on the roof put a lot of pressure that we'd come back in the spring and have to mop. In fact, we'd have to mop after rainfalls. We took very good care of the arch while we were, inhabiting that space. We mopped it and cleaned it and took care of it, given that it was leaking. But, in 2009 or 10, I came back after a winter's break to find that the entire transom was flooded with about 2 inches of water, and the water had gotten into the electrics, and so there were sparks, and it was a very, very dangerous situation. So I notified Prospect Park right away, and they came back and said, you got to be out. We'll give you 90 days, but you got to leave. So that was a panicky time. What do we do? But we were helped. Brooklyn College came to the rescue and opened up a space in Roosevelt Hall, an old gymnasium that has a kind of wraparound balcony, where the puppets moved in and have been available as a puppet library ever since. So, but you know, the arch was just a magnet for the public. It was a magical space that everybody wanted to see. The press loved it, loved that it was alive, that it was pulling people in, that it was a library, that it, and Brooklyn College is wonderful and as gracious a host as they have been all these years. Harder somehow to pull the public in the way.
Yeah, sure. It's a campus. It feels a little bit closed off. Let's take another look at that diagram that you gave us, so we have again sort of that visual sense of the space we're talking about. I know there's, last I saw there was information on the Cooperative website, the Puppeteers Cooperative website, about the Brooklyn Puppet Library, or the New York Puppet Library, and how to interact with it. You know,
it's hard to do
so
now.
we have this.
It's hard to get into the library at Brooklyn College now because they're closed because of the pandemic.
Of course. Yeah, it's hard to get into any library right now for much of anything. But in normal times, we'll revisit that when we return to normal times. But if with this planned renovation of the arch, it sounds like they're going to be shoring things up and hopefully keeping water out. You know, is that a space that you would like to see the puppets return to?
Of course. Of course. What else could it possibly be? You know, there it is, right across from that beautiful central library. You know, it's just like an extension of that wonderful library in Brooklyn, and there it is. You know, a service to the creativity of one of the most dynamic cities on the planet. It's a service to them, and it's a pedestrian's place to be in that little park, and to be in the park across the way, and to walk across and feel that, okay, this is about me, this is about us, this is about the people of this city expressing their stories. And so I've always thought that the Puppet Library was a beautiful fit in the Grand Army Plaza arch, and a wonderful, wonderful fit for the years that it was there. And I'd love to see it be back again.
Well, we'll see what happens. Let's get through the rest of this pandemic first, and get the arch shored up and fixed up, and we'll see what the future holds. But I can't tell you what a pleasure it's been to have you both here with us today, and to share the magic of that arch, to revive that magic a little bit in everyone's memories, and I do hope that we'll be able to visit with you again, learn more about your work, and that folks who get up to Boston will soon be able to access the Puppet Library there again, and we'll make sure to share links to all your work and projects that are going on, and make sure people see what you're doing as we navigate this fascinating time for performance. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Stefan. Cindy, too. Thank you, Andrew, for letting us revisit this. What a remarkable time in our lives.
All right. And to everyone else out there, please stay safe, and we will see you again very soon here at Turnstile Tours. Take care.